All right, I'm now recording this webinar. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the 2022 application cycle opening webinar for the UAB School of Medicine. My name is Angela Sullivan. I'm the Director of Admissions here at the School of Medicine. My role with that includes overseeing the day-to-day operations of admissions, recruitment, and medical student financial services, which includes scholarships and the first point of contact for financial aid. I'll also be joined by Dr. Grabowski, who's the Associate Dean for Admissions and Enrollment Management. She was pulled elsewhere, so she'll be joining us in about 5 or 10 minutes, and I'll transition over to her when she joins in. Also, the audience today, again, welcome. It includes both prospective students and pre-med advisors. We held an opening webinar last year to address changes and concerns related to the pandemic, and the overwhelming feedback we got was, please do this again. So we heard you, and here we are. So happy to talk through some of these changes. So again, welcome, and thank you for joining us. I am recording this webinar and we'll post this to our website, I would say next week, maybe the following week. So be on the lookout for that. You can always email us at medschool@uab.edu if you need us to send you that link. And so there are quite a few people here now, and I imagine more will be joining over the next 5 or 10 minutes. So I do ask that you self-manage and remain muted unless you're speaking. So we have set time aside at the end of the webinar for a Q&A. However, utilize the chat feature to ask questions you have at any time they pop into your head. So I do assume that everybody's familiar with Zoom, but you can either submit questions publicly via chat that everyone would see, or you can send them directly to me, Angela Sullivan. I'll be moderating questions later on this call. But like I said, if we realize we need to pause and add clarity on any specific sides, we'll monitor that chat for those questions. And then finally, while you all are held captive, I want to talk about a few upcoming events put on your radar. I'm going to ask that Lindsay on the admissions team go ahead and post the link to the visit page in the chat while I talk. So on that page that she'll post here in just a minute, you'll see that we have a couple of events coming up in the next few weeks that might be of interest to you if you're a prospective student, or your students if you're a pre-med advisor. So one of those events is actually happening this Friday, June 11th. We're hosting a virtual preview day that specifically focuses on our primary care track. So if you think you might be interested in a primary care career and you want to hear more, please join. Again, that's this Friday, June 11th. The next event I want to bring your attention to is happening again virtually, Friday, July 30th. This is what I'll call a regular preview day. And so you can see the website for more details about those two events, as well as how to register them. I'd also say if you are one who likes to go to things like that, you're interested in those events, bookmark that page. We update it as often as we can. This event was on there, and we've got, like I said, those preview days as well. All right, and thanks for posting, Lindsay. All right, so now I'm actually gonna introduce members of the admissions team. And Lindsay, since I've been calling on you, I'm gonna call on you first, if you'll go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Lindsay Gilbert, and I am kind of what we refer to as the first point of contact for admissions and enrollment management. So your phone calls, your emails, those types of things that come into admissions, I grab a hold of those first and answer those for you. And if it's something I can't answer, I get with another member of our team to help answer those for you. But thank you all so much for being here today.
Thank you, Lindsay. Amanda?
Hey everyone, my name is Amanda Bosque. I'm the program coordinator here in admissions. I deal with the logistics of interview day and the application cycle and all of that fun stuff. I'm very excited that you're all here today to learn more about our upcoming cycle.
Thanks, Amanda. Jenna?
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. It's good to be here. I'm actually really excited because I see former Shepeppers, I see former VIP Med scholars, and I actually see my dear friend and pet sitter, Meg. I'm so glad you're here representing UAB Graduate School. So I'm glad you all are able to join us today, and welcome.
Thank you, Jenna. And I see that Dr. Grabowski was able to jump in. So Dr. Grabowski, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. So glad to be here. Glad you could be here too. I'm Christina Grabowski, and I'm the Associate Dean for Admissions and Enrollment Management. And so I get to work with medical students from the recruitment stage through selection, support students through financial aid and scholarships, and records and registration, graduation, and then credentialing our graduates all the way through their career. So the teams, I don't do all that work. I get to work with everyone who does all that work all the way from start to finish. So glad to be here. Happy to visit with you today.
Thank you. We also have Dr. Woods. I'm going to pause for a second. I don't think you're on this call, but if you are, unmute yourself. So Dr. Woods is an OBGYN by training, but he also is our faculty advisor for the admissions office and serves on probably every committee we have as well. And then last but not least on the admissions team, but kind of in her own silo, is LaShondria Thomas, who is program manager for medical student financial services. She has, I think, the longest title we could come up with. And basically that means she oversees all of the scholarships and the first point of contact for financial aid needs for our incoming and current medical students as well. So that's the team. I think folks are sometimes surprised at how small it is. There's a lot of work that happens here. We also have several committees, our admissions committee, of course, that is a huge workforce for us as well. All right, so today's agenda, there's only 3 things. It's pretty straightforward. So today we're going to be discussing the timeline for admissions, which is next. I'll talk about both the regular cycle timeline as well as dates and deadlines for our special programs. After that, Dr. Grabowski is going to discuss admissions criteria, and she'll be highlighting, changes to this cycle. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier, put any questions that you have in the chat as you have them, and we'll address as needed. But we'll also have room at the end of this session for a Q&A, which again, I'll moderate. So if you don't want to put your questions out there publicly, feel free to go ahead and start sending them to me now. Okay. All right. So this is the application cycle timeline for regular MD, graduate MD. So those are people who are wanting to do a Master of Public Health, Master of Science in Public Health, or Master of Business Administration, as well as our PhD MD, so our NIH-funded MSTP program. So all of this is on our website, by the way. The AMCAS application is open now, and applicants are already able to submit those applications. Later this month, we're going to start trickling out secondary application invitations. We like to be sure to do some last minute testing that our system is working properly. So the first couple of days, it's a little slower, and then we catch up with that big bulk that we see then, and we'll start sending out secondary invitations several times a week after that. Just over a month from now, we will begin sending out invitations to interview. It seems like we were just doing this last year. Interviews will be virtual again this season, and in late August we'll begin hosting those virtual interviews. On October 15th, we'll send the first offers of admission. We'll start with early decision applicants and then offer admissions on a rolling basis. If you'd like to know where we are with reviews, so if you've interviewed and you're wondering when committee's going to talk about you, review you, I encourage you to check out our public Twitter. So we post the interview days that the admission selection committee are reviewing in real time. And so I'm going to ask that Lindsay post the link to our Twitter in the chat. Again, this Twitter is public, so you don't have to follow us. You can do what I do and just kind of shadow check it out and check in with you if and when you'd like, but you don't have to. If you don't want to know and just hope you'll get that good news phone call at some point, you can do that as well. So totally up to you. All right, and then finally, November 1st Thank you, Lindsay. November 1st is the deadline to submit the AMCAS application, and November 15th is the deadline to submit the secondary application for consideration for the 2022 cycle. All right. I like to have laryngitis when I speak. So here are the dates for other special programs. And so we're talking about early decision, deferred, delayed, MSAP, and our rural medical programs. So the AMCAS deadlines, you'll notice, are all on or around August 1st. And you can see the specifics for the secondary application submission for early decision, which is August 16th. And MSAP seniors, which is October 15th for scholarship consideration. Okay, so again, all of these dates can be found on our website. And I'm going to ask Lindsay, just to make things really easy, oh, she might have already done that, to put the selection criteria page in the chat. So from this page, you can see our selection criteria, but you can also see all the dates and deadlines, and then you can link off to these programs and read specifics about dates, deadlines, and requirements as well. Okay. All right, so now I'm going to pass the mic over to Dr. Grabowski. Dr. Grabowski, do you prefer to share your screen?
Why don't we go ahead and just leave it up for you? If you don't mind looking for me, that'd be great. We can go ahead to the next slide. Thank you. So I think I want to start by talking about our holistic review process and give you an idea of what that means to us and sort of set the stage before we start talking about specific admission criteria. And that is that when we're reviewing each application that comes to us, we're giving individualized consideration to each applicant to determine what they will contribute to our learning environment as well as to the field of medicine. And we are giving balanced consideration to the various experiences you all have had, or each individual has had, various attributes and academic metrics. And so it's a balanced consideration. We are obviously selecting students to come to med school, so we need to know who's going to be successful in the classroom and outside of the classroom. But we're also selecting future physicians, so people who are going to care for patients from a diverse population with all kinds of different health and socioeconomic factors that come into play. And so we are kind of like, I like to describe it as, we're not only an admissions functionality, right? So a college admissions, who can be a student here. We're also the HR department for physicians because we're deciding who can be a doctor, basically, right? So we're marrying that. So we have a lot of different tools to use. Obviously, an application process, we're looking at the academics, but we're also looking at your experiences. We're looking at what you bring, and we're interviewing to also look at interpersonal skills and professional and personal competencies all together to determine who matches our mission at our medical school. So it's also mission driven. There are many, many, many applications that we see of people who will make great physicians. We don't have enough spots in our class to take everyone we would like to take into our class. So we have to find the students that are a best fit for our medical school in terms of many different mission areas. And so that includes things along the lines of, we have an academic mission that you all are familiar with in terms of research and innovation and discovery at UAB. We're internationally known. So that's a piece for students who are interested in going that route. We also have an mission in the state of Alabama for rural, right, primary care. Those are very different, research and primary care. So our students don't have a cookie cutter sort of rubric that we're following that everyone has to look the same. We actually are trying to fill all of these various mission areas when we're building our class. So I think that's important. And as we talk about our admission criteria, hopefully that will become a little bit more clear to you as well. So I think we can move on to the next slide. So some minimum requirements. This has to do with receiving the secondary application. We don't send an invitation to every single person who selects us on AMCAS. And I'll tell you why. We are very committed to holistic review, but we also don't feel it's appropriate to send an invitation to someone and have them pay a $100 fee and they don't meet the minimum requirements we feel students need to have academically in order to be successful in our specific curriculum. And so we don't feel good about taking $100 unless you've met specific thresholds. And so for Alabama residents, it's a 3.0 science GPA that is required. That's your BCPM, biology, chemistry, physics, and math courses. You on your AMCAS will designate your coursework. So you might have interdisciplinary courses that aren't biology, chemistry, physics, or math, but fall under that because the content of your course has been biology, chemistry, physics, or math. So you'll definitely want to read the classification from AMCAS and make sure you classify your courses correctly when you do your AMCAS application. So a 3.0 science GPA for our Alabama residents and a minimum of a 495 on the MCAT will receive a secondary. There are some exceptions we'll make for students who are in Alabama residents who have a 493 or a 494 on the MCAT if they have an outstanding science GPA. And so those are looked at manually to determine who will receive the secondary. For non-Alabama residents, it's a 3.3 science GPA and a 495 on the MCAT in order to receive the secondary application. And all students must be either a US citizen or a permanent resident of the United States in order to move forward as well. So the system looks at these data and tells us you're ready for the secondary, and we send those out on a rolling basis, with the exception of the 493s and the 494s, which are looked at manually. Okay, so we can move to the next. Required coursework is on our website, so definitely follow that link that Lindsay put up with the selection criteria, and you can get there. So the general biology courses and the biochemistry is required, and some physics and biostats or college level math. So all the details are on the website, but if you have specific questions, we'd be happy to answer them. We just want to make sure you have a solid foundation. Makes no difference to us what major you have. And not that we don't care, we love to see a variety of majors in fact, but we're not looking for everyone to be one major. When we think about contributing to medicine and contributing to the classroom, the fact that you come from different backgrounds, educational backgrounds, is considered a plus for us, because that diversity of education means we have a whole lot more tools in our toolkit when solving problems, because you may come at problems from a different direction and from your training. So the major can be music, it could be biology, it could be engineering, nursing, a language, anything, as long as you have these prerequisite courses that are listed on the website. We do take AP credit for these, but then expect that you're going to take a higher level course to show your competency in these areas. And that's also spelled out subject by subject on the website to understand how AP plays into the role. Okay, I want to just, if I can, Angela, do you mind going back to the last slide real quick? Post-bac work. If you have post-bac work, we will use the same 3.0 and the 3.3 above. Is it 20 credits? I'm looking to Angela. I'm sorry, I keep saying Angela. Angela actually got her PhD in the last month or two. So she's Dr. Sullivan. So Dr. Sullivan and Amanda have helped me here with if it's 20 credits or more in a post-bac, then if you didn't get the 3.0, the 3.3, if you're out of state, we would look to post-bac, and above 20 credits, if you have that, you get the secondary, or graduate as well. Post-bac could be undergraduate coursework or graduate coursework. Okay, thanks for doing that. I wanted to clarify that. I saw a question. So we can bump a couple slides forward to the next one.
There's one other question in
Okay.
the
Yeah, go for it.
this is relevant to this slide, asking if we have to have all completed prereq coursework before applying or before arriving.
Great. Yeah, super great question. For the most part, we want you to have them done, right? But if you have one, you're planning for your senior year and you're applying after your junior year, and you have one or two courses you haven't taken yet, you can still apply. But if a lot of this coursework isn't completed, then the committee, when they review your application, will probably say, well, I don't have enough information. So, one or two courses, okay. But if you have a lot more than that, then I would say you're probably not ready to apply yet. Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about our academic review and what we're looking at. So a grade point average, let's say a student has a grade point average of 3.5. Does that mean they're ready or not ready? Well, that's a good question. What does the 3.5 mean? If a student had a 2.1 their freshman year because some situation happened in their life, which we don't want any of you to have happen, but some kind of extenuating circumstance that took them out of their classes and made it hard, and then a 3.9 their senior year, that 3.5 means something different than a 3.5 for someone who maybe started out really strong in lower level classes, but had a really hard time with higher level science classes and had a negative trend. So we're looking at trend in grades, we're looking at what courses you took, we're looking at test scores to see if they kind of match up with your grades. And so all of that is taken into consideration in a holistic way. To get the secondary, we're just using the number because there's thousands. We had 5,700 applications or something like that this last year. So a person's not going to review that at that level. But once you get the secondary and you're completed and you're reviewed, we're looking at all of these data very holistically. A couple of things that have happened during COVID that I want to address having to do with when we're looking at your academics that I think are important is that during shutdowns, so during times when, the schools went remote, or you got a choice, but you still weren't feeling comfortable to be in person. Pass grades are fine for the required courses. The coursework we talked about in the last slide. Online labs would be fine, right? For the most part, a lot of you didn't have a choice. We're going to take those. Normally, we would want letter grades, and normally we would want labs to be in person versus online, but that's all taken into consideration with the pandemic. Okay, so we will look to see how you were impacted and take those things into consideration. I do recommend that if you have the capacity to get a grade versus pass fail, and you are doing well, to get the grade. Because this committee does know what to do with grades, isn't really sure what to do with passes. A pass in one course or two courses that are prereqs isn't going to make any difference. But for a student who maybe is borderline academics, we're really not sure how you will perform in our curriculum based on sort of where you're at with your academics. A lot of pass grades may mean that we would need to see more information before we can move forward. So I would take that into consideration. And I would talk to your pre-health advisor, right? They need to look at all of what you've got going on and give you some advice on what the best forward is. Now, starting this year, y'all, if you're applying this cycle and you're going into a senior year, some of you are done with your school, some are going into senior year, pretty much most schools are providing in-person learning this fall. That could change with COVID, we never know, but hopefully you'll be doing more graded activities and feel safe coming into the new year to kind of engage as we normally would. Okay, any questions about that, Angela, from the question, or Dr. Sullivan, should we do that now or do you want to do it at the end?
Yeah, just one I think is good to address here. For pass-fail courses, will GPA value be assigned?
Will a grade value be assigned? Is that what the question was? We will not. The pass and fail will just be noted that it was a pass. It's not going to be part of the grade point average through AMCAS. AMCAS does the GPA calculation, and pass and fail grades are not part of the calculation. They're just noted. Great. Okay, so let's talk about experiences. When we do our holistic review, we're really looking at a variety of your experiences to understand your personal and professional competencies and what you're bringing to the classroom into medicine. So we're looking at your medical exposure, we're looking at your exposure to patients and trying to understand your motivation for medicine. Why are you choosing to come to medical school? And have you done your homework? Have you confirmed that decision? We're also looking at community service. Being a physician is a service-oriented career. So we're trying to understand how you've interacted with other people, how you've interacted with people other than yourself, your servant heart, and all of those kinds of interactions that you've had. We're also taking into consideration your teamwork. Medicine's a team sport. Sometimes you're the leader, so we like to see some peer leadership when possible, but mostly working in teams and being able to sort of maneuver within a team to reach a goal. And then also, we do consider research, although we don't require research for all students because not all of you are interested in research. Many of you have done a little bit to get to understand what research is, which is good. You will do a scholarly activity if you come to our medical school, because all physicians have to be consumers of research and studies, whether they're actually going to perform research or not. So that's important, but research is taken into consideration, but it's not a requirement in order to be admitted into our medical school, unless you're applying to the MSTP program, in which case it's going to be a significant part of the decision-making process. I do want to let you know that we expect some gaps in your experiences during the pandemic. We understand that there were periods of time when it wasn't safe for you to do the things that you either were already doing to continue them, or to do things that you planned to do. And so you had to pivot and make changes. There's going to be periods of time when you couldn't do anything because you were in stay-at-home orders. And there are times when you started to open back up and you were able to be innovative and do things maybe online or virtually instead of in person. And our committee will be prepared to understand and read those experiences. We're really looking at how you grew and what you got from the experiences, not how many hours and necessarily the specific setting. So make sure on your AMCAS application that when you're telling us about your experiences, you're not just saying I did this many hours of this. Tell us what you did, how you interacted, how you grew, maybe your motivation for picking that activity, and what you learned that will help you as a future physician. That will help us to understand if you have the personal and professional competencies, and spend less time worrying about how many hours you put in and more on what you learned. Okay, great. So if you have specific questions about that, happy to answer those. Dr. Sullivan, is anything on that before we move on?
Yeah, I think one thing you covered, but the other is, can you talk a little bit more about how we view virtual shadowing?
Yeah, sure. So the idea of shadowing is really to understand and witness a physician and a patient, right? It's not so much about you learning how to diagnose or learning the technical skills of a physical exam. We'll teach you all of that in our medical school. That's what we're here for. What we want to see is your observations. First, confirming that you want to be a physician by watching physicians do physician work. And then also understanding the patient perspective and the relationship and the communication between the patient and the physician. You can do that virtually. You can do that through telehealth. You can do that in person. And so speak to those lessons of what you observed in your activities, regardless of the environment in which you gained those. If you weren't able to see physicians and patients together in the last year, maybe you can interview some patients or get some experience with patients, and you maybe can't get the physician and the patients together at this stage, but try to make sure that you're understanding patient perspective if you can. Okay, any other questions on that? No, okay, thanks. So let's talk about application materials. What are what's the information we're going to use in this process? So in our holistic review process, we're obviously using the information we get from the AMCAS application. So your personal statement, your experiences and activities, your academic record. Then we have a secondary application with essays. And that's important to note. And we actually, on that selection criteria tab that Lindsay has already shared with you, we post our actual essay questions. So you right now can go see what the essays would be. So if you know you meet our criteria for secondary, you can be working on those now. And we do that so that you're not at a disadvantage if you're waiting for a later MCAT to come in before you can move forward with getting our secondary, et cetera. So we want you to be transparent with you, what it is that we're asking you to tell us about. We're going to take your MCAT scores into consideration. It's your most recent MCAT score that is used for the secondary application to decide if you get the secondary. But when we decide if you're academically ready for medical school, we look at all of your scores and certainly take into consideration improvements based on, post-bac work and all those kinds of things. So it's a holistic review. We consider your letters of evaluation. You do need your letters in order to move forward with being reviewed. and considered for an interview. So you definitely need to have those letters in for your file to be considered complete. Letters aren't there for the secondary. We don't have your letters yet when we're inviting you for secondary. They come into our system after you've been invited to have a secondary application. And this year, we're going to have situational judgment test scores. And I'm going to devote some time to that a little bit later in terms of what is an SJT or situation judgment test and why are we using it. So we'll talk about that shortly. So some COVID related changes is that we want to understand how the pandemic has impacted your plans and what you were going to be doing both in terms of academics as well as your experiences. And so there are places on the secondary for you to explain those pieces to us. We also have added questions to our secondary to better understand your understanding of the patient-physician relationship or the patient perspective in particular, so that, you know, if you didn't get to do as much shadowing or as much medical exposure as you plan to, because the hospital's pretty much shut down volunteer work and shadowing in the last year, that we can get sort of a better understanding of what you were able to accomplish in that context. Are there questions about this topic? No. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on. So let's talk about the situational judgment test. We at UAB have been selected by the AAMC to be one of the 6 pilot schools that are using the SJT this year in our admissions process. So let's talk about, so what is it? What is the situational judgment test? Honestly, guys, this is a phenomenal opportunity for all of you because this lets you shine and show us your personal and professional competencies. It's a little difficult in an AMCAS application to get across some of the competencies that you've built during your lifetime so far. And so you heard me talk about where the HR folks hiring who we want to be those physicians, those caring, compassionate physicians with high integrity and you know, ability to work in teams and all those kinds of things, as well as the academics. Well, we have scores for academics, right? We have GPAs and we have MCAT and other things. And so the SJT adds into the holistic review information about your personal and professional competencies. And so it's a wonderful opportunity for you all. It's online, it's because we're a pilot, it's also free. So you don't pay to take the SJT. There's no additional burden to you as an applicant in terms of cost. You can take it anywhere that you have internet connection. So there will be a proctored environment for you, and they'll run you through that technology through the AAMC. So you just need to be able to take, have an internet connection and in whatever software specifications they share with you. So I talked a little bit about why really we want to provide another tool for holistic review that is a validated tool that's been studied to show personal and professional competencies, and this one has. And so that's why we want to use it in our process. We believe it will help us to choose even better future physicians than we have in the past. So all of our regular MD students or students who are in combined degree programs of master's degrees like public health and business administration, we're going to ask that you take this year. And I'm going to talk about how we're going to use it. So don't get nervous yet. It's going to be used very positively in this first pilot cycle. It's highly encouraged for students who are thinking they're going to apply to our rural programs or our MSTP, the PhD program. We won't be stopped in the process if you don't have it for those programs, but we would highly encourage for you to take it as well. And so we can go on to the next slide. So these are the dates for taking the exam with the AAMC, and we can maybe get the link up at some point to the AMC, to the SJT page. I should have asked for that ahead of time. I didn't, thanks to whoever can go kind of find it. There are test dates in every month, a couple times in June, a few dates in July, August, and September. Their registration is open for all of these dates now, so you can go ahead and register if you haven't already. Registration close dates you can see, and then when the scores are going to be released. And so we would ask that you go ahead and do that. Now, we're not going to use the SJT in the process to get your secondary. You're going to get your secondary, get to give us your letters. And we will even review your application to determine whether or not we think you're eligible for an interview without the SJT scores, because this is new and the release dates are coming a little bit later. However, before your interview day, we need your SJT score. So we'll be probably in putting out interview invitations, we'll be confirming that you have a registration date. And we're going to ask you to make sure that you have a registration date so that we know the score will be here when we plan to use it. So which leads me to how we're going to use the scores so we can change to the next. So we're really using this as an opportunity for you to demonstrate your skills. It will not impact whether you get your secondary education. It will not impact whether we want to invite you for an interview, although your interview date that we invite you for May, we want to have your SJT score before you go to our final committee. So it could impact the delay of the interview invitation, but not whether or not you're going to get one. We won't use the data to decide if we want to interview you, but when we interview you could be impacted because we need to know that you will have a score for committee to consider in the end. So we're going to use this as a plus factor. And here's what I mean by that. Only the top quartile scores are going to be visible to our final selection committee when we make our final decision of admission. So anyone with outset that's not in the top quartile, the committee will just see a blank and they'll be trained to consider that you have an average score, that you're fine. There's no issues. So we're not using the score to eliminate anyone at any stage in the process this year. We want to use the SJT to help students, not to eliminate students from the process. Okay. And then if you did take it last year, because there were 2 schools that used the SJT last year, so maybe you were applying and this is a second cycle for you. If you have an old SJT score, we'll take it. We do encourage you to take it again because it's free and it doesn't hurt to take it again. We'll use the highest score between the 2 exams in our consideration. Have questions popped in about the SJT, Dr. Sullivan?
Yes. How similar is the SJT to Casper?
Yeah, so great question. So this situational judgment test gives you a series of scenarios. And so you read a scenario, and then you're given multiple different possible responses, and you rate each possible response on an effectiveness scale. This is a highly effective way to handle this scenario. This is not at all an effective way to handle this scenario, and some points in between. Okay, so the level of effectiveness. So it's multiple choice versus writing, which Casper is more of a written response that's evaluated. And the other difference between the AAMC SJT and Casper is that your score is shared with you from the AAMC SJT. So you'll know how you performed. It won't be a mystery. The score will be shared with you. And in the past, Casper hasn't done that, although they may be changing their processes moving forward. So it's not a written response, it's multiple choice. Or like effectiveness scale, like you're selecting one level of effectiveness for each response. So if a scenario is placed before you, there could be 4 or 5 or 6 different responses that you're saying, this is effective, this is not effective, and that kind of thing. I hope that helps.
Thank you. And can you talk more about what we mean by top quartile?
Yeah, so when we look at the scores, the people in the 25% highest, so above, basically you could think if you're above a 75 percentile of the test takers in your score, if you're in that top part, we'll be sharing those scores with selection committee as a plus factor. So, and if it's below that, we'll assume that you did well, that you were fine. It just won't be a plus factor for you. So I think that's important for you to know. The idea of it, let's talk about a plus factor. I'll give you a different example because what's a plus factor? What does that mean? So I mentioned to you, we don't require research as an example for all of our students, unless they're trying to go into a research route career, right? Then we're going to require it. So if you're going to be an MSTP. But if a student has really good experiences and they have research, oh wow, also they have this impressive research that they've done, it's a plus. But we wouldn't ding someone who didn't have it. That's what we mean by a plus factor. So SJT score, you're in the top quartile, you have all these things going for you, plus look, you have really good score in personal and professional competencies, that could be a plus. But for someone who doesn't have the score, we would just rate you on everything else, and we wouldn't ding you for not having that top quartile. So we're really trying to use this to advantage students, but not to disadvantage students in the process. It might help some people shine.
Thank you. Those are the only SJT related questions I see right now. I do have a handful of other questions, but I'll ask any questions you all have, anything related to what we've talked about or something you were hoping we'd talk about and we didn't. Feel free to send them to me directly or everyone in the chat.
And we'll definitely keep up. We have a Q&A at the end too. So if there aren't any on that, oh, here we are. We're to the Q&A. Look at that. We're happy to answer any other questions you might have. So do you want to throw out some of the other ones?
Absolutely. Let me reorient. Okay. How many times can someone apply to medical school? So if you apply multiple times, can it hurt your chances of being accepted?
Yeah, so there's not a specific number, and I'll ask my colleagues to jump in if you think of something that I don't address here. But I think that, you know, there's a couple different things to think about when you've been a previous applicant, or the way I kind of look at it. First off, the positives is perseverance. This is truly the career you want. You weren't successful the first or second time. You're still interested, and you're working toward that ultimate goal. That's a positive. If you've gotten feedback on your application or sought to figure out where your gaps were, and then you've done actions to improve in those areas, that's super positive as well, right? So we know that you have a good capacity for improvement. Maybe the first time you applied, you just weren't quite ready. Or maybe you just didn't stand out in the process because it's so competitive, but you had all the pieces, but you didn't stand out. And so then in the next year, you've done even more, right? And so then you can stand out in the next cycle. So capacity for improvement, continuous additional experiences and learning are all positive. And so we've had students apply 2 or 3 years, and that's fine. When you start getting, well, if you haven't made many changes to your application, but you keep applying, we're really concerned about you, because you don't seem to understand that you haven't been competitive, and you're not as reflective as we'd like for you to be just sort of transparent. Because as a physician, there's lots of things you have to reflect on and make improvements and change. And so you should be showing us the ability to reflect on where you think you need to grow, and then showing the ability to do that. And so if we get the same application year after year, you're not going to be successful. That's going to be frowned upon. The other thing is that I would say, if you've applied more than 2 or 3 times to UAB and you're only applying to a few med schools and you're not getting in, that you should be applying more broadly, because we have so many applications and only so many seats. You might be a phenomenal future physician. We may very much need you in the state of Alabama or in the region, and we just don't have enough spots. So definitely apply broadly. Anyone want to add anything to that?
No, I think that's great. The only other thing I would add that you touched on briefly, and I want to make sure people are aware of, if you, and we'll communicate this, if you apply and are not accepted, whether you've interviewed or not, you can request feedback from us. I mentioned Dr. John Woods earlier, so our faculty advisor. That's part of his role. He'll go and read your entire application, and any comments from, you know, screeners, interviewers, if you're, you know, kind of wherever you were in the process, and he'll provide feedback on that. And again, if and when you know, okay, I am gonna for sure have to apply again next cycle, that is something that we provide and we communicate that.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that the important note is that those advising appointments are just that. They're advising. It's trying to help you think about how you might improve your credentials. They are not appeal appointments. They're not, oh, I'm curious why I didn't get at UAB, but I got in at this other school. We're not going to meet with you if you have a spot in medicine, because you're good to go. You're going to be a doctor. We're only going to meet with you if you need to think about your credentials and what you can do to improve. The other thing I will add just quickly is that you should continue to engage in all the things you've been doing as a pre-med during the application cycle. You don't, hit the send button or the submit button on your application and stop doing the things you've been doing. One of the reasons certainly is you might find yourself in another application cycle and you don't want to have a gap in your experiences. You want to show that you've continued to work. But the other thing is, try to shift your mindset. You didn't do those activities to get into med school. You did those activities to be a phenomenal physician and take care of patients, and you're building skills that we think are important. So continue building those skills, continue that on, and then you'll be more competitive in the next cycle should you find yourself there.
Thank you. Do you have any recommendations for out-of-state students as we apply, or what do you look for in out-of-state students?
Yeah, so we do definitely have a preference for in-state students as a public medical school in the state of Alabama, only 2 allopathic medical schools in the state. So about 85 to 90% of our students who matriculate will be from the state of Alabama. So it's more competitive for out-of-state students, to be honest. So we're going to look at our areas of mission and your alignment with our areas of mission. And that's going to be important. Ties to the state. So the idea that once you complete your training, you may be interested in staying in Alabama and taking care of our communities is important too. So those pieces of information are taken into consideration in addition to the entire holistic review we've talked about. So I think it's good to let us know if you have significant ties to the state. Yeah, and mission areas. So things like primary care, things like research and innovation, whether things, mission might be you're interested in and have experiences showing you've demonstrated interest in meeting medical disparities and trying to address the many medical disparities that we have. It could be in your community engagement and your significant engagement in your community and making your community a better place. So a rural medicine interest. So all of those things would be taken into consideration because those are the kinds of physicians we want to graduate.
Thank you. I actually had several questions about out of state, and they were all addressed except for one follow-up that just came in. What is the competitive level like for out of state students who completed undergrad at UAB?
Yeah, so there's a tie there, right? So if you've already done your undergraduate degree in the state of Alabama, whether it's UAB or Auburn or UA or UAH or Troy or any of the schools in the state of Alabama, you've spent time in Alabama, and so that's going to be considered a tie to the state. And so students with those kinds of ties are maybe someone who's never even been to Alabama applying from out of state and really doesn't have any compelling reason to come to Alabama may not be as considered as highly as someone who has a tie. So I think being a graduate at an institution of the state makes a difference. And if you've been a UAB grad, maybe you have ties in the community too, in terms of the service you've provided, and you want to come back and continue to serve this community because you've been living here for 4 years. So you'll want to highlight that too.
Thank you. You stated that students would receive a secondary if they meet the MCAT and GPA scores. Would you advise students to wait until submitting their application after receiving their official MCAT score?
So that it's very much a personal decision of what you want to do. You'll get in the queue when all of the pieces are together to be read by our team. So you can't, if you have an old MCAT that meets the 495 and you are submitting your secondary, we're going to read you because you've met the requirements and we're going to consider you. But if you have a new MCAT coming in, you might want to wait to hit the submit on your secondary until you see the new MCAT because you want us to take that new MCAT into consideration. If you don't have an MCAT at all, you're not going to be reviewed because the MCAT decides whether or not you get the secondary. So it just kind of depends on your personal situation. If you're waiting on, for example, an important letter of recommendation, if we have the minimum number of letters in your file and your MCAT score and we have your secondary submitted, we're going to review you. We're not going to wait for that letter to come into your file. So you have control of when we read your application to some extent by hitting submit on your secondary. So hit submit on your secondary when you're ready for us to consider you.
Thank you.
I'll jump in real fast, just to kind of add.
Yeah.
For AMCAS applications, we would say submit as soon as possible. It does take time for them to verify. And so the sooner you get into the queue for that, the sooner that we'll get your application. So that's for AMCAS applications.
Thank you.
That's great. That was an important point. I will say that if you're in a spring course that's going to end and you want that grade on your AMCAS application, wait till the grade is posted so that you can get a transcript to AMCAS. That's the only thing that you might be waiting on, is if you think that grade's going to be important because you're working on a positive trend. But otherwise, get that MCAS turned in.
Thank you. And actually, that reminds me of something else. If you're worried about GPA and need to have those 20 hours through graduate coursework, those grades need to be submitted as well.
That's right. So you might, that's a great example of another reason why you might hold off MCAS, but the vast majority of you, it's get it in early to get that verification done.
All right, I've got a couple of SJT questions and then I'll move on. I've got a couple of questions about letters of recommendation. So one, will the SJT score be sent to UAB automatically when it's released? And two, can you clarify about when, if the score needs to be released before they can get an interview invitation?
Right. Okay. So it doesn't, let's start with that. It doesn't need to be released. We don't have to have the score to get the interview invitation because we're not making a decision about your interview using the actual score. We need to see that you've sat for the exam or you have a registration for the exam, because our selection committee, after interview day, the selection committee, we don't want them reviewing you until your score. So the release date needs to happen before the day you're going to interview. Does that? Not the day we give you the invitation, but the day of your interview, because the day after your interview is when we send you to committee for review. And I think that's complicated, and I'm sorry about that. It's probably more complicated than it needs to be, but we'll hold on sending you the invitation until we know the dates that we're inviting for are after your release date. But it's not, we don't need the score in order to do the invitation. So go out there and get registered is the point. There's not a lot of prep for you to do for this. So just go take the next available date and get it on your calendar.
Thank you. It sounds complicated, but the reasons why are actually to make it better for applicants. If we had some kind of cut and dry thing we were doing, it would have people kind of in a waiting period, and we don't want that for you. All right. Next question. I'm a non-traditional applicant who will be submitting individual letters of recommendation. Is it okay to utilize an engineering course faculty member instead of a science course faculty member for a letter of recommendation?
If that person knows you better and can speak to you and your personal and professional competencies, yes. You know, you want to pick writers who aren't just going to say, yeah, you were in the class and this is the grade you got in terms of faculty. You know, that you want them to be able to talk about how you worked with others, how you approach hard material, other kinds of things, because we're trying to get at those personal and professional competencies as well. So that's fine. An engineering faculty member is fine. Yeah.
Thank you. And I have someone asking a question about science GPA and MCAT. I'm not sure I understand. If you can give me more information on that. On what you're asking exactly. And then the next question, does applying to the primary care track make the overall process more or less competitive?
Yeah, so it really shouldn't negatively in any way impact. So there's no less competitive by being primary care track, because when you apply to the primary care track, you're applying for all of our campuses and the primary care track. So if there's only limited spots in the primary care track, but if we want you in the class, we're going to offer you to one of the other to UAB, going to one of the other campuses for your clinical experience. The primary care track students all go to Tuscaloosa, but you can become a primary care physician from any of our programs, any of our campuses. So I think that's important. And so you're not being less competitive in terms of that. It's not lessening your chances. What I will say will lessen your chance is if you apply to primary care track when you have no intention of being a primary care physician in any way, shape, or form. And so if you read the description, it's like, do you want to be a community-based physician versus an academic medicine physician? Do you want to be in a smaller community? And there's a number of specialties. So it could be primary care strictly like family medicine, internal medicine, pediatrics, but you might want to be a general surgeon or a psychiatrist, and that in a smaller community. that would be great for primary care track. But if you want to be a vascular surgeon in a big city, but you apply to primary care track because you think, well, I'm applying for more spots, so I'll do it, and you're not a match, that will be frowned upon, because the question will be, did you not understand the program, and are you just trying to game for more spots? And so don't do that. Make sure that you're looking at the description of the program, that it appeals to you and you want to learn more. There is an opt-out period after the interview. If you've learned about the primary care track and it doesn't seem like a good fit for you at that point, you can then say, I'm no longer want to be considered for this program. So we do have you verify that after the interview day, but you don't want to opt in just to increase your chances unless you're really interested. I hope that answered the question. We do have folks who just say, oh, I'll just apply to everything. Well, I know you're really excited to become a physician, but make sure your mission alignment is there.
Thank you. And I'm going to do one more plug for the primary care track preview day this Friday. I just put the link actually to our visit page, but you can register through there.
Yeah, and tell your friends too, because sometimes people are like, I just don't understand this primary care track. So that preview day is a great opportunity to learn what that is all about.
All right, and I have one last question because I know we're right on the hour. So I have a question, if you'll talk a little bit more about the holistic review process. So for this person's asking, if a student has a low GPA, but their MCAT score is, for example, 505, how would that impact the chances of getting an interview?
Yeah, so that's so hard to answer specific questions, right, with numbers and throwing them out to me, because what else is in the application file? And is the low GPA because of a slow start with a really good finish, or is it that someone had a really low GPA throughout their undergrad year? A 505 is below our average. We usually have students at about a 508 as average, which means 50% are above and 50% are below. And so a 505 is going to be a little bit below average. But if that is after, a low start and a high finish, maybe someone would get an interview. If I were to look at someone who had had a low GPA all throughout undergrad with a 505, I would recommend a post-baccalaureate program and say, hey, go do like we have at UAB, the Master's of Science in Biomedical Health Sciences, which is a phenomenal program, post-bac program that really prepares students for medicine. I would say go do that and show us yet you're ready. If it's a low GPA consistently. So it just depends. What I will say is that phenomenal leadership, phenomenal medical experience, phenomenal community service is not going to get you a med school position if you can't show that you can handle the academic rigors of medicine. So it's not an or. You need to have both. And so sometimes we talk about holistic review, people think, oh, well, I don't have really good grades, but I'm phenomenal in these other areas. Well, low grades mean that you might not be able to pass the classes to become a physician. So you need it all in terms of solid academics. And that's okay if it's over time that you've made that improvement, that's okay. And solid experiences. So that conversely, you can have a 4.0 with a 520 MCAT and not get an interview because you haven't shown us that other part, the other side. Okay.
Thank you. I've put a couple of links in the chat. One's the preparedness worksheet, which shows the academic and non-academic attributes, experiences, and metrics that we look for as a part of the holistic review process. And the other link is the Master of Science in Biomedical Health Sciences, that program where we call Blaze to MD. There's a couple different ways to kind of get into it. And I've shared the link for folks to look at that as well. And Dr. Grabowski, that's it. That's all the questions.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks to the admissions team for being here and putting this together and answering questions, and also all the links and things. And thanks to all of you for coming and being interested in the UAB School of Medicine. We're thrilled you're here. We're here beyond today. So if you have questions and you want to email us, at medschool@uab.edu or give us a call. We'll put that contact information up. Feel free to do that. We're happy to answer those questions. If you need pre-health advising, we will refer you back to your pre-health advisors at your own institution. But we're happy to certainly answer any questions about our admission criteria at any time. Thanks so much for being here. Take care, everybody. Be well, be safe.